Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're carrying out a forensic analysis of the Bank Employees Pension Regulation (BEPR), specifically regulations 35.1 and 56. Both regulations are likely to decide the final outcome of the Singla case now before a bench of the Supreme Court.
This Supreme Court clash between banks and retirees is no polite hearing. It's a fierce fight for justice and dignity in retirement. I'm Priyanka Chakraborty and my co-anchor is Nisha Bhattacharya.
For listeners, this case shows how persistence, regulation, grammar, and bureaucracy collide to magnify the power of a single word like shall.
It's really a masterclass in how a single word change in a document 20 years ago can suddenly turn into a multi-billion-dollar liability today.
So, our mission today is to step into the ring. We need to understand why our source is claiming the banks were literally on the ropes with a bloody nose during the recent February 5th hearing at the Supreme Court.
And to do that, we have to strip down two specific pieces of regulations that are acting as the smoking guns here.
Right. Regulation 35.1 and Regulation 56 of the Bank Employees Pension Regulations, the BEPR, from 1995.
These are the rules of engagement then?
They are. And honestly, it's rare you see regulations weaponized quite like this.
Okay, so before we get into the heavy artillery, set the stage for us. Why is this turning into such a regulatory fight right now? What are they actually fighting for?
Well, at its core, this whole thing is a battle over pension updation. In many pension schemes, especially government ones, there's this notion that a retiree's income shouldn't stay frozen in time.
When salaries rise with inflation or new wage deals, retiree pensions are updated too, preventing retirees from falling into poverty as the currency devalues over, say, 10, 20, or 30 years.
Right? It's basically inflation proofing.
Because 1,000 rupees today buys a lot less than it did in 1995.
Precisely. And the argument here is that bank retirees have been denied this automatic update for decades, and they're fighting to prove that the original rules, actually promised this to them all along.
And the courts, the referees in this battle, are starting to agree with the retirees, which is why we have this really vivid metaphor of the boxing match.
A judge even said in open court that banks must pay pensions as per regulation. Remarkably strong language from a bench usually so restrained.
It's rare for the Supreme Court to speak so bluntly before a verdict. If this were boxing, retirees would be clearly ahead on points.
Now I have to play devil's advocate for a second. To a layperson,
Or frankly, even to me, what the judges said sounds like a statement of fact. Drivers must drive according to the legal speed limit.
banks must pay according to the pension regulation. Why is that such a breakthrough statement in the MC Singla case?
Aren't the banks already paying pensions?
And that is the nuance, and it's a brilliant one. Yes, of course, the banks are cutting pension checks every month, but the judge's comment implies a gap. A gap between paying and paying according to pension regulation.
It suggests banks may be following custom practices or ad hoc policies, not the clear letter of the law.
So they are paying something, but the court is hinting it might not be the right something.
Exactly. Think of it this way. If I owe you $100 according to a written contract and I pay you 50 because that's what we've always done for the last 10 years. I'm paying you, but I am not paying you according to the contract.
Oh, I see.
The court is basically signaling that they're now concerned strictly with the letter of the law. No more IBA vibes and spins, no more historical practice, just the letter of the law.
Which brings us to the text itself. This is where we need to get our hands dirty with Regulation 35.1. The source calls this the primary weapon.
Yes, this is the left hook in the crux of the retirees' argument, Regulation 35.1.
The source highlights a specific timeline here that seems really important. It mentions an amendment from 2002 to 2003. Before we get to the grammar, what was the situation before 2002? Because apparently it was quite different.
Oh, it was very different. Before that amendment, the regulations were incredibly restrictive. They had what we call time-bound limitations.
Time-bound?
Basically, pension updation was only explicitly written down for people who retired during a very, very short window between January 1st, 1986 and October 31st, 1987.
That is a strangely specific window. So if you retired in 1990 or 1995, the regulation didn't explicitly cover you for updates. You were essentially in a different category.
Bottom line, if you retired in that narrow window, you got updation. Everyone else didn't. Then in 2002, the government issued a gazetted amendment, meaning it became official law, which removed those specific time-bound dates.
So just remove the time barrier completely?
Yes, it introduced what they call universal applicability. It didn't matter when you retired anymore. The amendment effectively said this rule, it applies to everyone eligible.
But that wasn't the only change though, was it?
No. They also tweaked the verbs, and this is where it gets delicious for language nerds.
I was reading this in the notes. This is the shift from will to shall.
It sounds so trivial, doesn't it? Like we're just splitting hairs.
It does. I mean, if I tell my friend, I will meet you at the bar or I shall meet you at the bar, the result is the same. I'm getting a drink. One just sounds a bit more Shakespearean.
In social life, yes. In statutory interpretation, they are worlds apart. Will can imply futurity, something that is going to happen, may be dependent on other factors. It can be a prediction. It will rain tomorrow.
Maybe it will, maybe it won't.
But shall in legal drafting, shall is a loaded weapon. It's a command, it is imperative, it creates a mandatory obligation.
So shall removes the choice?
Yes. The amended regulation 35(1) says that the basic pension and additional pension shall be updated. By using that one word, the amendment removed the bank's discretion. They can't just sit in a board meeting and ask, well, can we afford to update pensions this year? Is the P&L good? The regulation says you must update pensions. It's a statutory right.
That's a massive shift in leverage. And our source mentions that this regulation doesn't just say do it says do it this way. It points to a formula,
Right? It refers to Appendix 1.
which sounds like the map in the back of a fantasy novel where the treasure is hidden.
It's less dragons and more algebra, unfortunately. Appendix 1 contains the formula for calculation. The source argues that this formula aligns with the method used by the RBI. It's generally defined as basic pension plus dearness allowance plus 10%.
Okay, so let's pause and just look at the scorecard here in this boxing match.
Well, retirees are still ahead on the scorecard.
The retirees have Regulation 35I. It applies to everyone because the dates were moved. And it says the banks must update pensions because of the word shall. That seems like a knockout punch on its own. Why do they even need more?
Because in law, you always want a safety net. You always want a plan B in case the judge decides your plan A is, ambiguous for some reason. Maybe the bank argues, well, shall be updated is vague about the timing, or Appendix 1 is outdated. That is where Regulation 56 comes in.
Regulation 56. The source calls this the residuary power, the right jab.
Think of it as the catch-all clause. You can't write a rule book that anticipates every scenario over 50 years. Technology and economies evolve. So Regulation 56 basically says if something's missing or unclear, follow the central government's practice.
It's a pointer.
It's a bridge. Specifically, it points to the Central Civil Services Rules of 1972. It says if the bank regulations are silent on an issue, the bank must follow the rules laid out for government civil servants.
And why is that connection, that bridge, so valuable for the bank retirees? Why do they want to be like the civil servants?
Well, firstly, like civil servants, bank retirees are former public sector officers. Secondly, civil servants have a very well-established automatic system for pension revision. Every time there is a pay commission that raises salaries for working government employees, the retirees get a boost too. It's automatic. It's just baked into the system.
I see. So the bank retirees are saying, Handalu Sandant fast. Hey, Regulation 56 connects us to the government rules. Government rules say automatic updates. Therefore, we should get automatic updates too.
Precisely. It's a parity argument. They're arguing that they shouldn't be treated as second-class citizens compared to other government employees like RBI bankers. They're saying the residuary power guarantees them equality.
But surely the banks have a defense against this. They can't just be sitting there taking punches. I mean, if I'm the bank lawyer, I'm looking for a way out of Regulation 56.
They do have a defense, or at least they try to. Regulation 56 does have a little caveat. It says the bank can determine exceptions or modifications.
There it is, the loophole. We will follow the government rules unless we decide not to.
It sounds like that, but if you look closely at the text, and you can bet the retirees have, it's stricter. The bank can make modifications, but, and this is a big but, it requires the prior approval of the central government.
Oh,
They can't just unilaterally decide to ignore the link. They need a signed permission slip from the government to deviate.
and have they gotten that permission?
Well, that is the contention.
The retirees argue that no such permission to deny updation exists.
For their part, banks haven't produced a document saying, hey, the government gave us permission to ignore the parity rule. So, without that specific government approval to say no, the default setting is yes.
This is fascinating. It's like a pincer movement. On one side, you have Regulation 35(1), the direct attack. The rules explicitly say you shall update.
And then on the other side, Regulation 56 is the flank attack.
And even if the rules were silent, you have to do what the government does, which is updation.
And stuck right in the middle are the banks. And this is why the court's observation about being liable to pay according to the regulation is so damaging for them. The regulation just doesn't seem to leave banks much wiggle room.
The source mentions that the pensioner associations view the 2002 amendment as establishing a statutory right. I want to dig into that term a bit. What's the difference between a statutory right and, say, a negotiated benefit?
Oh, a huge difference. A negotiated benefit is something you agree to in a meeting, a settlement between a union and an employer. A statutory right codified in law. If you have a statutory right to something, the other party cannot deny it without breaking the law.
And that's why the shall matters so much? It turned a potential benefit into a concrete right.
Correct. And that's also why the financial load argument, which is one the banks often use, is falling flat in court. Usually, banks will say, look, we can't afford this, it'll bankrupt us, look at our balance sheets.
Which is a practical argument. I mean, if the money isn't there, it isn't there.
It's practical, sure. But legally, if you have a statutory obligation to pay, your ability to pay is secondary. You can't tell the taxman, oh, I'm not paying my taxes because it would be really hard on my budget this year.
Right.
The law doesn't care. The law says pay, and the Supreme Court generally takes the stance that statutory dues must be paid regardless of the load.
So if the banks are lying on the canvas, what happens next? The source says we're at round 10 of 12.
It implies we are nearing the end game. The Supreme Court is the final arbiter here. If they uphold this interpretation, it creates a huge precedent. It means the banks will likely have to pay arrears going back years.
Regulation 35.1 highlights the danger of what I call zombie laws.
Zombie laws, I like that.
Yeah, rules that are technically alive, they're on the books, like Regulation 35.1, but everyone just acts like they're dead. The banks probably thought the 2002 amendment was dead and buried, but it's now come back to bite them.
That is a perfect analogy.
It leaves us with a provocative question, though. The source asks this, and I think we should too. If this regulation was amended in 2002, and if it clearly said shall,
Okay,
why has it taken 20 years and a boxing match at the Supreme Court to fix it?
that really is the tragedy of the system, isn't it? The promise was there, the law was there, but it took stamina, organization, and frankly, funds for the retirees to actually get the court to look at it.
It's almost like the law was asleep.
The law was there, but the enforcement wasn't. It makes you wonder how many other mandatory rights are sleeping in rule books right now.
It's a sobering thought. Just because you're right doesn't mean you win. You still have to fight the rounds.
And you have to know your grammar. Never underestimate the difference between will and shall. That distinction alone might just be worth billions.
We will definitely keep an eye on this bout to see if the TKO is confirmed. It certainly sounds like the referee is ready to call it. Thanks for helping us unpack the fight.
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, comment, like, clip, and share.